Well, now to the war in Ukraine. Kyiv says that its troops have liberated more than 20 settlements in the past 24 hours as they continue a rapid advance in the eastern Kharkiv and Donetsk regions. Now, the map here that you're looking at, it shows the front line 12 days ago and then yesterday. And you can see the latest territory that Ukraine says it has recaptured from Russian control. That is in light blue. Russia is dubbing its withdrawal from the region, it's calling it a regrouping. Well, overnight, Ukrainian officials have said that Russian airstrikes on civilian infrastructure had caused widespread power outages. Ukrainian President Zelensky says that Russia is deliberately trying to deprive people of electricity and heat. And today, the mayor of Kharkiv described these strikes as Russian reprisals for Ukraine's recent territorial gains.
This abandoned tank is one of many left behind in the panicked Russian retreat from the Kharkiv region. In a nearby village, vehicles and piles of ammunition testified to the Russians' hasty withdrawal in the face of the Ukrainian advance. Ukraine's military command has pledged to push on. The liberation of settlements from the Russian invaders in the Kharkiv and Donetsk region continues. As previously reported, during the retreat, Russian troops quickly abandoned their positions and fled deep into temporarily occupied territories or the Russian Federation. This trend persists. The Russian command has played down the setback, and President Vladimir Putin has yet to acknowledge it, instead striking a defiant note on Western sanctions. Russia is confidently handling the external pressure, essentially a financial and technological aggression coming from certain countries. The economic blitzkrieg tactics they were counting on haven't worked, which is obvious to everybody, including them. Putin's silence has not stopped growing criticism of the military's dismal performance. That could turn out to be a problem for the president, despite a harsh crackdown on dissent since the outbreak of the war. Putin can still count on the Russian Orthodox Church to be a pillar of support. Today, as we live in a very difficult time, our prayer is a special one for the head of our state and Supreme Commander-in-Chief, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, who bears a special responsibility. But should the war continue to go badly for Russia, pressure will mount on a leader who not long ago seemed unassailable.
All right, for more now, we want to bring in Justin Crump. He's an intelligence and security expert and the CEO of the intelligence consultancy Sibylline. He joins me tonight from Washington, D.C. in the United States. Mr. Crump, it's good to see you again. It seems every time we talk, the situation for the Ukrainian military improves, and that is the situation definitely tonight. At least that's what it appears to be. What we're seeing, what does this tell us about the state of the Ukrainian armed forces, in your opinion?
We've talked before, as you said, I mean, combat power comes from three different areas. The physical, so what you actually have, people, tanks, guns, the moral, the purpose for which you're fighting, and the conceptual, so what you do with it all. And I think what's really clear here is that Ukraine's made great progress in all those areas. We knew the moral component was high. We knew that their physical component was growing with what they've been given from the West and what they were able to generate from their people. And it's that conceptual component that's really come into play here with this amazing operation, distracting the Russians, hiding the gathering of forces inside Kharkiv, and then pushing forward so successfully, so fast that we've seen at this stage.
So, I mean, the President Zelensky, he knew what he was doing all along, it seems. Now, for weeks, if not months, he's been telegraphing to the world that there's going to be a counteroffensive in the south. Actually, that was meant for the east, but he said that knowing that it would draw Russian forces to the south. Is that what he's done?
Yeah, very much so. And I mean, I would stress, though, I do think the counteroffensive in Kherson is also real. I don't want to diminish that. It is not just a feint or a play. There is real momentum there, and there was a real opportunity there. I think what they did so cleverly was committing forces to that and having a lot more available than perhaps people had expected, and being able to assemble them in secret and deploy them in the east. You and I talked before about the importance and difficulty of deception on this battlefield at a time when UAVs are prevalent, satellites, social media as well. It's very, very hard to assemble troops like this with that level of security. So an extraordinary effort by the Ukrainians to gather 5 brigades worth of troops, equivalent to a NATO division, with such secrecy. And as you said, it played a blinder, really.
Yeah. And we are seeing reports of, and it's astounding, Ukrainian troops outnumbering Russian forces in this section of the front line by as many as 8 to 1. Now, can you tell us how can this happen, considering the fact that when we're looking at the cities of, Kupiansk and Izium, which have been used as staging posts for the Russian invasion, how can they let their troop numbers be decimated like this?
I'll be fair that the claims of 8 to 1 have come from the Russian side, and I'm pretty sure when you're on the receiving end of a assault like this that's making the most of what we call maneuver warfare, so very mobile warfare, where you overwhelm your enemy in time and space by just hitting them so hard. I'm not sure they knew precisely how many people they were facing. I'm absolutely certain it felt like 8 to 1. But this is all about creating superiority in a small area to overwhelm the enemy. So it's actually Ukraine's concentration of force secretly that was so important here. That meant they could punch hard with an armored force originally, lots of mobile forces behind that, to break through the Russian front lines, which were a bit of a shell in this area. It's where they sent forces to recover that were damaged earlier in the war, and they've never really rebuilt. And then, of course, once they got through that shell, there was just nothing behind it. And hence the Russians have collapsed so fast and so far. They've just been overwhelmed in that way. So it's all about concentration of force locally. But that's been so hard to achieve on this battlefield until now.
And you use the word collapse. I've heard other military analysts using that word today as well. I mean, that's a serious word to be using when you're talking about this situation, particularly for the Russian military. I mean, are we seeing a cataclysmic event unfolding right now for Russia?
Yes, but within certain boundaries. I think it's a collapse of this part of their military forces on this front. It won't necessarily persist. I don't think we should think just because Ukraine's advanced this far and fast that it can be maintained now ceaselessly. Ukrainian forces have to regroup. Russia's had some time to try and build new defensive lines. So it's not inevitable this route will continue. It might, though. And I think the most important thing here is the change of tone by Russian commentators. Actually, the open blaming of Putin for the first time, really, for these failures, and him being held slightly more to an account. Now, it's early days in this, but that's the big change that we haven't seen so far during this conflict. I think all eyes are on what Russia does next and how far and fast this rot spreads. But at the moment, they should hold other parts of the south. They can possibly stabilize back, but they are definitely now on the back foot in a defensive position, which is not what they're expected to do by this point.
After the failure of the Kyiv offensive, we saw a purge of Russian military and intelligence staff. At least that's what was reported. Considering what we're seeing right now, what is that going to mean? I mean, are we talking about something of similar magnitude? And if so, what's that going to mean for the military? And what does that explain why we're not hearing much from Moscow?
Yeah, partly. I think partly the Russians just don't know how to react to this. It's caught them completely off guard. They've shown throughout the conflict they just don't have a speed of reaction to change circumstances. That's to do with their structure. It's to do with their mentality. It's partly to do with their early losses that actually have left them on the back foot really throughout this conflict in many ways. Even when they were advancing, they were struggling. And of course, repeated purges do not make for a better leadership team. Otherwise, everyone would do it all the time. I mean, it's already a sign of failure, but you can only purge so many times before there's no one left. And again, they're running out of people to blame, which is why the president, who previously has been almost floating above criticism in many ways in the eyes of the Russians, is now personally being mentioned as actually he's responsible for this. That is a real change. I don't think they know how to react. And again, all eyes on whether they try and escalate this. That'll be very, very hard for them at this stage. And there is that warning of course, if Russia tries to escalate, it could indeed collapse, which could be something that we see quickly at this point. Again, it may stabilize, they may hold what they have, try and dig in for the winter. But regardless, there's a lot of very painful decisions being made in Moscow right now. And I think having to face real failure in the face right now for the first time, I think we're going to have to be honest about that.
Justin Crump, as always, Mr. Crump, excellent analysis. We appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I want to pull in now Justin Bronk. He is a senior researcher in the military team at the Royal United Services Institute in London. It's good to have you with us tonight. What do you see when you hear about these, and we're reporting them as these continued advances that we're seeing in the eastern and southern parts of Ukraine? How do you read that? I mean, are we talking about real progress for Ukraine?
I think we're talking about more than progress. This is, at this point, a fairly staggering turning point in the war. This is certainly the most serious reverse that Russia has suffered since it was forced to retreat from its multi-pronged assault on Kyiv back in April. They've lost, and the Ukrainians have liberated, more than 3,000 square kilometers of their own territory in about 5 days. It's one of the most successful military offensives in modern history. And indeed, it's also, so far, come at a relatively light cost for Ukraine, particularly in the northeast. Down in Kherson, the longer running and much more anticipated counteroffensive, it has been much more bloody for both sides. It's a much more attritional struggle. But in the north, essentially Ukraine having managed to find a gap and punch a hole in the Russian front lines in the Kharkiv region at a place called Biloguirka, were able to rapidly push reinforcements in and drive mechanized forces deep into the Russian lines of communication. And because the Russian military is so overstretched in Ukraine, they're so short of infantry. They already were relatively short of infantry compared to the size of their army at the beginning, and they've lost more than 48,000 dead and nearly 100,000 plus casualties in total. So they're really struggling, having only started mobilization efforts in July. That's not enough time to train new people. And so once Ukrainian forces broke through at Biloguirka and got into the rear areas, there were really no reserve forces that the Russians could use to stop the advance. And it's led to this cascading collapse of one entire flank of the Russian position in Ukraine. What's more worrying for the Russians is that the pressure is still on in Kherson down in the south. And so they can't move their forces that are concentrated down there to try and reinforce the north. They're trying to throw in barely trained reserves from Russia to stop the retreat. But so far, it seems that they're having difficulties. This is a very dangerous position for the Russians at the moment.
Mr. Barr, you use the word collapse. I mean, are we looking at the Russian army in the process of collapsing now? I mean, they still, of course, outgun the Ukrainians, but it sounds like this is an inner military collapse that you're describing.
It certainly appears that way, and we knew that the Russian military had serious morale problems, not least because the shortage of troops means that their troops don't get any time off the line. So we're 7 months into the invasion. Many of those troops have been in combat, or at least in the war zone, the entire time, mostly in the open with very poor equipment and food. And now they're faced with essentially a war of movement for which they're just not prepared in the north. And so many troops have simply abandoned their heavy equipment and their vehicles. And once you do that, of course, you can't stop because you don't have the equipment to defend yourself. So, for example, in Izium, we see these enormous stockpiles of ammunition, of tanks, of other armored vehicles, because an entire Russian flank just basically left their equipment and tried to get out of an encirclement that they were suddenly threatened with. And once that sort of thing starts, it's really very difficult to stop without a huge body of troops coming in to kind of provide a counterpunch and steady the line. And that's exactly what the Russians don't have here. Ukraine probably doesn't have the logistics capacity to both secure fully everything it's already liberated and also keep pushing without risking overstretch. So they may be forced to slow down. But at the moment, the Russians seem to be falling back almost faster than the Ukrainians can pursue them in the northeast. And in Kherson, they're still grinding forward. And of course, if the morale panic spreads to Kherson, and we saw a collapse there as well, suddenly at that point, the regime in Moscow even starts to look very shaky and worried.
Yeah, it is a remarkable turn of events, a fast turn of events as well. Justin Bronk, we appreciate your analysis tonight. Thank you. All right, from the battlefield analysis to the political input, I want to pull in now Mr. Markus Faber. He is a member of the German parliament with the German Liberal Party, the FDP. He also sits on the Defense Committee in Parliament. Mr. Faber, it's good to have you with us tonight. We're hearing there, you just heard it from this military analyst. These are remarkable turns of events in favor of the Ukrainian military. Knowing that, is now the time to increase those weapons shipments to Ukraine? I mean, that's being discussed here in Germany. Are you in favor of that? Does Germany need to send more weapons to Kyiv?
Germany absolutely has to send more weapons to Kyiv. The Liberal Party is very much in favor for it, basically since the beginning of the war. I think it would always been better if Germany would have decided for heavy weaponry 2 months ago. So the current offensive the Ukrainians are posing could be supported even better. But we haven't had this decision 2 months ago. We absolutely need it now.
So far, no country has sent in Western battle tanks to Ukraine. Do you think Germany should now lead the way with this and change that?
Germany already has sent tanks to Ukraine, Gepard tanks, and I think we have to do more about it. We can do more about it when we're talking about Fuchs, when we're talking about Marder. This is where we have a lot of in supply. I think these are the first steps that have to be taken now.
And what about you? I know there are members of the German parliament and also in the German government who oppose sending more weapons or heavy weaponry. What argument do they have now, considering that we're talking about possible Russian retreats taking place?
That's a good question. We better ask themselves. I think some colleagues in the Bundestag still fear a kind of escalating conflict in Ukraine. But I've been in Ukraine, I've been in Kiev, I've been in Kharkiv, in Kramatorsk, in Sloviansk. It's a full-scale invasion. It's a full-out war. It's a brutal war. It's a terrorist war. And there will no be conventional invasion. So Germany should do what we can do, and that includes sending tanks as well.
Markus Faber, a member of the Defense Committee with the German Bundestag. Mr. Faber, we appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.